Hello, my name is Shahin Mirzaei. I'm a master's student at Penn State Law, and I'm currently working with Manglona Lab for Gender and Economic Equity. For one of the lab's project, Witness to Her Story, we are capturing women's experience during a dynamic era in the United States. Today, I have the privilege of welcoming Ms. Virginia Schols. She's an amazing grandmother, a farmer's daughter, and a retired X-ray tech. Thank you so much for joining me, Virginia.
Thank you.
Great. Let's start with your early childhood experiences. When were you born?
I was born in a small town in Montrose. I was born in Saginaw, Michigan, and I was raised in Montrose, Michigan, on a farm.
Great. And who were the members of your family?
I had, there was my mom, my dad, and 3 older brothers.
And how was your relationship with your parents?
It was good. My mom was very busy, and she had already had 3 boys. They were 10, 8, and 7. So by the time I came along, she was just very busy. My dad was a doting dad. He loved having a daughter, and he was very loving and very sweet and would not allow my mother to discipline me.
So, what kind of things did you usually discuss with your parents?
Mostly just what was going on around the farm. Since television was very new and radio was stationary, so when we were working, my parents were working outside, we didn't have a lot of news of any kind going on in the world. So mostly we just talked about what was going on with our family. I had lots of aunts and uncles, and we were all very close. Back then, you didn't have a lot of other things besides family.
Mhm.
So that was the basis for everything, I think.
And did both of your parents work outside the house?
No, just my father. He was a trackman on the railroad. And then, of course, we had the farm. My mom no, she was very busy she worked on the farm, and we had a market at our house. It was under the big tree, and we had a lot of customers that would come in and buy the cucumbers, tomatoes, cabbage, potatoes, whatever we sold.
Did your parents maintain those roles throughout your whole childhood?
Um, yes, yes, they did. My Yes, my mom always said that she wouldn't have her children do anything she wouldn't do. So she would work outside with my brothers in the vegetables, and I would stay in the house and clean house and do the ironing.
And how are the chores and responsibilities around the house divided between your parents? I know that you said your father worked outside of the house and your mother inside of the house, but did your father help around the house?
No, not at all. Um, when I remember, I was probably about 6 when my mom was in the hospital having some surgery. Um, my father tried to cook. It wasn't a very good experience. And instead of doing the dishes, he rinsed the plates off and put them back on the table. He wasn't, he did not do inside chores, but my mom did outside chores.
Oh, And how did that make you feel, like witnessing this kind of role between your parents?
Well, it was definitely that my dad was the breadwinner, and um, but my mom worked hard, but she didn't have any pay to show for it.
Mm,
Um, she would have to ask for money. Um, they did have a checking account that was both of them, but she didn't have an outside income. So my thoughts were I wasn't going to do that.
mm-hmm.
Had to ask for someone else's money, I was going to have my own.
Wow. So that's a decision that you made from early childhood then.
I was probably, yeah, between 8 and 10. Yes,
Mhm.
definitely.
And how was the decision making split up between your parents?
It was my dad. It wasn't split up. Um, he was the head of the household and brought in the money, so he made most of those kind of decisions.
Mhm. Did either of your parents have hobbies outside of the house?
No, my mom crocheted, and she sewed. Um, but as far as hobbies outside, no, except there was a neighborhood club of the women, and she had that. And then there was a card club for couples,
Mm,
and they did that with the neighbors. Neighbors
mhm,
were very important back then, and especially in the rural areas. Um, most of my parents' friends were people that lived right close to us.
mhm. And how was your relationship with your siblings? I know that you had three older brothers. So how was the dynamic?
Um, they spoiled me. They used to take me with them sometimes on dates. Um, they were very loving and supportive, but very protective, and still are.
So I know that you said you mostly worked inside of the house, but I'm wondering, between you and your siblings, how was the chores and responsibilities were divided?
It was mostly the boys did the stuff outside and I did the stuff inside, but I never, they cleaned barns and hoed in the fields. And I did sometimes help pick vegetables. And if I did go outside, I always had to have a skirt on. I always wore dresses. Um, if there was help needed, I could, I would get on the tractor and help, or even when I was 10 or 11 years old, I knew how to drive
Mm.
the truck and the tractors. So if help was needed, I usually did something like that rather than the physical labor.
And why did you have to wear skirts outside of the house?
My father said that he waited many years to have a girl and he expected her to dress like one.
Did you ever break that law?
Um, I went to camp when I was 12 or 13, and yes, I did. Um, I wore because of course at camp you couldn't wear a dress. So he didn't have a choice. He didn't like it, but and then I did keep some of those clothes and wear them once in a while, but that wasn't something he liked. And I never went, quote, quote, to town or out in anything other than a dress and school in a dress.
So how were your parents' expectation for you was different from what they had for their older sons?
They expected the boys to have good paying jobs and to have families. Well, all three of my brothers were given land from the farm. Two of them built houses. But my mom always wanted me to be a nurse or a teacher, but they didn't have the resources or the knowledge of how to help me reach those goals.
Mhm.
Um, when I decided to go to X-ray school, they were supportive. But I think my dad just expected me to find a husband that would take care of me. And that's
And
not what I wanted.
and were you also given land?
No,
No.
no, no, just the boys.
Mhm. And do you think this difference between this different expectation that they had, was it due to your gender or was it because you were so much younger?
No, it was definitely due to the gender. Um, my father was almost 40 when I was born, and um, both of them were very stated in the culture of the time that the women just didn't have land or do things like that.
Mm. So do you recall any of your friends' household and was it the similar to yours with respect to roles and like responsibilities?
Yes, I think so, except some of my friends, especially the ones that lived in town, their parents were, both their mothers and fathers were quite educated. So I guess there were a little bit different expectations for them, but still, girls and women just only did certain fields. They only did teaching or nursing.
Mhm,
And that was the culture.
mhm. So now that we've talked a little bit about your childhood experience, let's move to your elementary school experience. I know that you first started school in 1952. So could you please describe your school for us? Like how big was it, your school?
Um, our school was very small. Um, we had morning and afternoon kindergarten. Um, it was silly because the country students who had to be bused went in the morning, but the city kids who could walk to school went in the afternoon. Um, I remember I remember being disciplined in kindergarten,
Mm.
and I wasn't really used to structure. And I was playing the hand game with another student, and I had to put my head down. And I had to go home and tell my parents that I was in trouble at school. And it wasn't good.
And so it seemed like it was a strict school. How was your parents' reaction?
Um, they always said if you get in trouble at school, wait until you get home because you'll be in double trouble at home.
Mm.
So I never got into trouble again.
Oh. So, with all that, did you enjoy going to school?
I did. I like the socialization, especially. Um, I enjoyed history and learning. And, it was just, it was expected that you do well in school. So I did like school.
Mm. Did your parents have the same expectation of doing well at school from your brothers?
Hmm. They, whatever they did was just fine. They didn't expect them to do a lot of homework and work because they worked outside.
Mm.
So,
And sorry, go ahead.
no, go ahead.
So, was there a dress code required for girls?
I'm sorry, was there a dress code? No, um, not really. You could wear pants, we called them slacks at that time. Um, you could wear them. I think I don't even, I'm thinking about the boys. I don't think there was anything about their hair or um, hair growth, but I don't remember anyone doing that. Um, there really wasn't a dress code because there wasn't a lot of choices. Things were kind of plain and everybody just kind of did the same thing.
Mhm. So, what did you usually wear to school then?
Um, in the winter, my mom would let me wear a pair of pants underneath my dress. And then when I got to school, I took the pants off. And I remember we had what was called a cloak room, which is where we put our coats and our lunches. And I remember going into the cloakroom with other girls, and they were taking off their pants underneath their skirts too.
Mhm. So, were your teachers mostly men or women?
Oh, that's a good question. In elementary school, they were all women. I don't remember any men. Um, in high school, it was probably 50-50. Women taught home ec, men taught shop.
And
Um, and men mostly taught science
mm,
and math, and I always thought that was strange. Um,
so you didn't have any female mathematic teacher?
no, no, they were all men, and our science teachers were all men.
Mm-hmm. And did you have any dream or aspiration for what you wanted to do growing up?
I was in what was called FTA, Future Teachers of America, and I was also in FNA, Future Nurses of America. I don't think I knew what I wanted to do. I just knew I wanted to be away from the farm.
Mm. And why was that? You didn't like living on the farm?
The farm represented work to me, and
I'm sorry, I didn't get that. Could you repeat that?
the farm represented work to me, and there was so much work that there wasn't time to do anything else. And I didn't want that kind of life. Um, I saw some of my friends who lived in town, their parents came home from work and actually had family time, and we didn't have that.
Mhm.
And I thought that was so cool.
Mhm. So there's a saying, if you can't see it, you can't be it. So I'm wondering, did you have any role model that you could look up to growing up?
I had aunts who had, I think, three aunts who were teachers, and one was a nurse, and she was probably the one that I was closest to. Um, she actually was in the delivery room when I was born. She
Mhm.
had just finished nursing school and was working in the OB department, and she was able to be with my mom. My dad
Mhm.
was at home in the cabbage patch cutting cabbage, and he went home to my dad and told him that he had a little girl.
Mhm. Why your dad wasn't present at the hospital?
That just wasn't something that they did back then. I don't think he was at the hospital for any of us to be born. Um, he always had work to do on the farm. And the day that I was born, he had this huge order for cabbage. And so he was cutting cabbage.
Mhm. Did you have any role model outside of the family?
Oh boy. I think one of my friend's mothers, she was a nurse, and she was very, the only word I can think of is professional. She was always dressed very nice, and she when she went to work, she always wore nice clothes and then changed when she got to work into her nursing uniform. And I always, I mean, that was the person I looked up to because she had really nice clothes. And back at that time, not a lot of people in our town, did the fashion trends.
Mhm.
That was really cool.
Mhm. So shifting into your high school experience, I know that you graduated from Montrose High School in 1966. So could you please describe your high school for us?
um, Montrose had just built a new high school, and we were the first class to go to the high school from ninth grade all the way to 12th grade and graduate from that school. Um, we only had, I think there was 76 in our graduating class. And you knew everybody and you knew everybody's family.
Mhm.
Um, and you knew all their sisters and brothers. Um, it was a close knit school. And on Friday nights, everybody was at either the basketball game or the football game. And that was school activities were important then because we didn't have all the other things.
Mm. And was there any dress code required for girls at your high school?
Only that the skirts not be short.
Hmm.
They had to be, I believe they had to be below the knee. And pants could not be tight. No shorts, absolutely not. And I think, I don't remember there being a dress code for the boys. Yeah, I don't think so.
And how did you feel about these rules, like the lengths of the skirt and all that?
Um, you know, there were cliques in our school, and some of the girls in the very what's the word I'm looking for? The very high clique, the fashionable ones, they would try to have skirts right at the knee. And I remember them being told, don't do that. If you come to school like that again, we'll call your parents.
Okay. How what was your most favorite subject at school?
History.
And why was that?
I loved learning about the world. That was really important to me, and different states and things that world history and American history. It was just fascinating to me how things had changed.
Mhm. And what was your least favorite subject?
Math.
And why was that?
I actually think the reason I hated math was because the teacher for most of my high school years was the coach of the basketball and the football team. And of course, he favored the boys.
Mhm.
And this is a terrible thing. He actually called me Canary Legs.
Wow.
Now, that would never be permitted today. But yeah, he was not a nice man. And I think that's why I hated math.
And how did you feel when he called you that?
Oh, it hurt my feelings. It made me feel terrible, but everybody else thought it was funny, of course. So you had to go with it and laugh too. Um, yeah, it wasn't fun.
Did you talk about this with your parents?
I did. And my mom did talk to him, but it didn't change. He had names for other people too. And now I don't remember some of the names. Um, but I wasn't the only one. Um, and that was just his culture. But that I don't remember him calling any of the boys names. I just remember the girls.
Mm. And were you able to choose your classes in high school?
Because it was a small high school, the only thing you could really change and choose was whether you wanted home ec or a foreign language. And those were the electives. And if you had any thoughts of going on to college or anything else, you had to take the foreign language. Um, the boys could choose shop, and that was really the only choices. Excuse me.
That's okay.
Second.
Sure.
There we go.
So which one did you choose? Did you choose foreign languages or home ec?
I did choose foreign language. Um, I knew how to sew and cook and bake, and I didn't want that choice. So I chose French. That was the only language we had. We didn't have Spanish, just French.
Mhm. And were there, so was there any kind of sex education offered in the curriculum?
There was back in sixth grade, we had a class that everybody had to take, and we actually went on a bus to Flint, Michigan. That was our closest big city. It was about a 30-minute bus ride, and the girls were put in one class and the boys in another, and we were taught about menstruation and that type of thing. And then we were all put together to see it was called reproduction, and it was seeing how the baby formed.
Mhm,
Other than that, we were apart.
mhm. So the content of the classes were the same?
I'm sorry.
So where the content of the class was the same for boys, was it the same for boys and girls?
No. When we were put separate, ours was strictly on menstruation and um, talking about women's bodies and all of that. And I assume the boys were, I have no clue because the boys didn't talk about it.
So was it helpful, that sex education classes?
It was for me because my mom wasn't one to talk about that type of thing.
Mm,
And so it was good for me, but a lot of the girls already knew everything, but I didn't.
mhm.
So
And why do you mhm. And why do you think your mom didn't want to talk about it? I mean, was that the norm or in the society?
I think it was the norm in society. My mom was a very, what's the word I want to use? Very old fashioned. And she only had a 10th grade education. My dad only had an 8th grade education. So I think, other than her own experiences, she really didn't know how to
Mm,
talk about it.
mhm. So how that make you feel, like not knowing any of that and then seeing your friends know most of the things?
It just made me realize how my parents were like the others, but yet they were different because they were uneducated and they were very old-fashioned.
Mhm. So, did you do any extracurricular activities at high school?
I was in the band and I played the flute. And I think I was in some clubs. I was in the yearbook club and the newspaper club. It was a school newspaper. And I, because we lived out in the country, I would, I was lucky my aunt and uncle lived in the city. So if there was a club meeting after school, I could stay and then go to my aunt and uncle's house, and then my mother would pick me up when she had time.
Mhm. And were the same extracurricular activities offered to boys and girls at your school?
Well, there were more sports for boys than there were girls. There was, I think, there was basketball for girls and there was softball. That was it. Boys had track, basketball, baseball, and football.
Mhm. And what did you and your friends do during your free time at high school?
Mostly always went to the Friday night games, whether it be basketball
Mhm.
or football. And um, there was a bus that would take us to away games. And when we were older, um, once we had um, our driver's license, I was very lucky. My parents would let me take the car on Friday nights.
Mhm. And what did you do on Friday nights?
I'm sorry, hold on. We would go to the big city, which was Flint, and we would, I remember the A&W had a drive-in and McDonald's had just opened. And you have to understand, you could get a whole meal for 52 cents. And that was a hamburger, a shake, and French fries. But we would get a fish sandwich at Burger King, go to McDonald's and get French fries, and go to A&W and get a root beer. And that was the big thing. And we thought we were so cool.
Mhm. So, do you recall reading any books or magazine outside of a school curriculum when you were at high school?
Teen magazine had just come out, and that was a big deal. Talked about the teen idols of the time and the clothes, the fads of the time. It was a big deal. Um, Books, I read mostly like Trixie Belden, and she had all kind, and the Bobbsey twins. There were a whole series of both of them. And there was another one called Sherry Ames, and that was a big series. And she traveled around the world, and I thought that was so cool. And I loved those books.
Mm. So which one was your favorite?
Um, Cherry Ames Army Nurse. That was a cool one.
Mhm. And did you have any job while you attending high school?
No, I only worked out at the house doing selling vegetables, and we went to market on it every Saturday, and you had to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and go to the market, and we were there most of the day. Now, if you had gotten home at a decent hour on Friday night and hadn't stayed out late, my dad would let you go to the truck and have a nap. But
Mm.
if you had stayed out late, he would make you work all day. He never believed in, and he never said, well, you would have to work all day because you were out late. You just knew that that's what was going to happen. And
That
so
was the
I,
rule.
yes, so I never had any high school jobs or any other job besides being an x-ray technologist.
Mhm. So earlier you mentioned that your role models were nurses and teachers. So did your dreams and aspirations change in high school?
I think I became more aware that my parents didn't really have the money to send me to college, and there wasn't such a thing as a student loan back then. So I had a cousin who went to x-ray school, and I guess thinking about it, she kind of was one of my role models in high school, because she was only 3 years older than I was. And so that's where I got the idea of being an x-ray technologist.
Mhm. So shifting into your X-ray school experience, I know that you attended a school from 1966 to 1968.
Mm-hmm.
So could you please describe your school for us? I know it was a 2-year program, but like, how was the school overall?
We worked with a um, registered technologist and had classes in the afternoon. But in the mornings, we worked um, as soon as you were taught enough, you were able to do exams under supervision of your senior technologist. Um, we had, I think there were 17 students, and there were only 5 males and 12 females. And yeah, that in the afternoon when we had classes, we had anatomy, positioning, um, patient care, those type of classes.
Mhm. And where was your school located?
It was in Flint, Michigan. So I drove, it was about 20 miles to the hospital. And my parents, sometimes I drove the truck and sometimes I drove the car.
Mhm. So I know that you said you followed your cousin's footstep and chose to go to X-ray school, but was there any other specific reason for choosing X-ray school?
I knew it was a good paying job, and you didn't have to pay for school. Um, So those were the important things to me. Um, Once I started in the program, I realized that I really, really liked being with
Mm,
patients and being able to help them.
mm. So, did other girls in your community also continue their education after finishing high school?
Yes, almost all of the girls in that I was close to, they all went on to college. Um, and sometimes I would go, if I didn't have to work on the weekend, I would go visit them.
Mhm. Did you work while attending X-ray school?
I'm sorry, did I work?
Did you work while attending X-ray school?
Um, Only at the hospital. Um, Other than that, no.
Mhm. And
I,
was there, sorry, please go ahead.
as second year students, we were allowed to work without a senior tech, but then we still had classes and we were paid 38 cents an hour.
Mhm. And were both boys and girls paid the same?
As students, yes, they were.
Mhm. And throughout your X-ray school, was there anything else happening in your life?
Well, yes, as a second year student, um, the new class came in, and um, there was one particular male that took my eye, and it turned out that he is now my husband of 55 years.
Mhm. And could you please let us know how did you guys start your relationship?
Um, we we actually had a bowling league at the hospital, and it was, I think it was on Thursday nights, and um, Jim, my husband, was on a different team than me, but we started talking, and that's what happened.
And when did you guys get married?
We got, he had gone to college before he came to X-ray school, and so he graduated from X-ray school in 1969, and he graduated, I think it was August 28th, and we got married September 13th.
Mhm. And do you know whether your other friends were getting married at the same time?
They were, even my friends who had gone to college, they were getting married um, while they were still in college.
Mhm. So, shifting from your school experience to your career, I know that you started working almost immediately after graduation. So,
I did.
how did you find your first job?
Um, I stayed, I graduated from the X-ray school from Hurley Hospital, and I started working there um, right after I graduated, and I was senior tech on second shift, and that was when my husband was still in X-ray school, and I stayed at that hospital until we got married.
Mhm. And how was the hiring process?
You know, back then it was so easy. I didn't even have an interview. The chief tech just said, "Would you like to continue working here?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Okay, you're hired." It wasn't
And
that easy other places, but
yeah. And what was your responsibility in your first position?
um, on second shift, there was only, I was the only tech, registered tech, and then I had 3 students under me.
Hmm.
And most of our work was from the emergency room.
Hmm. And were your coworkers mostly men or women?
They were mostly women, um, because when we graduated, the men, most of them went to different hospitals where they had, um, you know, in X-ray, you could specialize in um, special procedures or be a surgery tech or that type of thing. And most of the males did that.
Mhm. And why didn't you do that? You didn't want to do that?
No, I think because I was still such a naive person, I stayed where there wasn't a change. Until I got married, I didn't really have the support or the courage to do something different.
Mm-hmm.
But I finally found that. It just took me longer.
Mm-hmm. So how long did you hold that position?
Um, Almost for a year and a half. And then after we got married, I interviewed, I actually had an interview at a hospital in a different town, Saginaw, and was hired. And that interview was very, what's the word I'm looking for? It was very easy. Um, it was the there was a man who was head of the department, but there was a woman who did the hiring. So that was very easy interview. And I worked there for, I think, 2.5 years. And then I stayed home for a year and a half. And then we moved to Detroit, which of course was a big city. And I trying to think of, did I interview? I actually think my husband interviewed at Hutzel Hospital, and they didn't have a slot for him. But he said, "Well, my wife is looking for a job." So I got that job, and he went to another hospital and got a job. But then later, he came back to Hutzel and was a supervisor.
Mm-hmm. So what was the interview process like? What kind of question did they ask?
Um, Mostly just about your experience and course, where you went to school. Interviewing at that time was pretty easy because there weren't a lot of x-ray techs. It wasn't a big field. And so every place was looking for people. And if you had any experience at all, they just wanted to hire you right away.
Mhm. And were you equally compensated in comparison to your male coworkers?
No,
How did you realize that?
um, I think I didn't realize it until my husband started working. And I realized, wait a minute, our checks are the same here. And then I started talking, coming from a small town and being so, what I'm looking for, so, not stifled, but so nestled in. I really didn't, I was very naive. And it was like an awakening when I finally got out in the real world. And it never occurred to me that someone doing the same thing wouldn't just make the same money as me. I just assumed it would all be the same, but it turned out it wasn't when I started talking to people. And
Who did you talk to?
the other techs,
Mhm.
and there was one particular woman at Hutzel who was campaigning because she was radiation therapy at that time only hired women. And she was the senior tech supervisor tech in radiation therapy. And she was so up in arms because she wasn't making the same money as the other supervisors who were male. And the women all got together and they never were able to change anything, but it was the talk of the time.
And how did it make you feel when you realized you are not being compensated equally?
Made me mad. Um, I was a very, I felt I was a very good x-ray tech. Jim, my husband, was too, but um, I thought if we were doing the same job, certainly I should get the same amount of money, plus the fact that I had a year of seniority on him.
Mhm.
So that should have meant something too. Um, but I think when I talked, by then I was talking to other people, and even teachers, some of the teachers didn't make the same money as their male counterparts because some of my friends were teachers. And that was a problem.
Yeah. So you said that you talked to other X-ray technician and some teachers. Did you also talk to your husband about it?
Oh, yes. We had quite a few discussions about it. And although he felt that I deserved the same money, he also felt that it was good that he was making the amount of money he was, because then I could stop working for a few years.
Mhm. So did you feel that you had the same opportunities as your male colleague? I know that you weren't compensated equally, but other than that,
Absolutely not. Um, most of your head x-ray techs were always men. And special procedures at the time was always men. If there was, like, the OR techs made more money, those were always men. No, it wasn't the same.
I know that at some point your husband moved into a cardiac catheterization lab. Was that
Yes,
considered a promotion?
yes, they made more money. Yes, and
And
it
very
was all men.
and very able to move into that lab?
No,
Why?
no, I wasn't able to move into that lab because I was a female.
And how did that make you feel?
Absolutely angry. Um, but what happened was I ended up doing mammography, which was only females.
Mhm.
So I guess because that job came up, I wasn't quite so upset. Um, but still, he made more money than I did.
Mm. So other than mammography, were you able to move into other labs?
Um, no, I never did. I when we moved again, because my husband left the hospital and became a salesperson. He worked for Toshiba Medical. Um, I went to, instead of working at a hospital, I went to a outpatient lab so that I didn't have to work weekends. So I was home with my family.
Mhm. And what kind of patients did you usually work with?
Um, mostly, um, it was mostly like walk-in chest x-rays. We did pre-op testing, EKGs, um, some broken bones, a lot of spine x-rays, um, that type of thing.
Mm. During your career, do you recall working with individuals who identified as LGBTQ plus?
Yes. When I worked at Hutzel Hospital in mammography, um, our um, area was in the outpatient building, and there were doctors' offices in that building. And one of the doctors was a pioneer in gender dysphoria at the time. Um, no one had really heard. There, there wasn't a lot of talk about that kind of a patient or about LGBTQ. It just wasn't a thing back then. But this doctor, um, he felt very strongly that um, people, some people just needed um, to have therapy and help, and then he would do the surgeries. And when we did the mammograms on the females changing, that was usually the last surgery that was done, was the mastectomies at the time. And then when we would do the males coming to females, that was the surgery, that was the x-ray that was done before the implant surgeries.
Mm. And were you okay working with these patients?
I was, when no one explained to us the whole procedure at first. And then when we questioned the doctor, and he had a class for us and explained his practice and what he was doing and why he was doing it, I felt it was very important for these patients. But when we first had it, and you would have a um, the requisition for the exam would have a female's name, and you would go out and call that person, and it was a male. It was like, wait a minute, what's going on here? But once we understood what was going on, um, they were a lot of those patients were embarrassed, and it was important to make them comfortable.
Mhm. And were those patients also welcomed by your other colleagues?
Um, Not all of them. Some of my colleagues were very, I don't know whatever other way to put this, but they were very Catholic and um, very much into their religion. So I did most of those patients just
Mhm.
because I felt more comfortable me doing them than
And,
someone um, who wasn't comfortable with them.
mhm. And why were you okay with these patients? I mean, in that era, there was so much misinformation and biases against LGBTQ plus community. Why were you okay?
I think just because I think because I came from such a small town, and people weren't always accepting, and I wanted to be. I remember one particular person in our school who could have very, who would have been such a good candidate for that surgery, and it would have made her life so much easier. I just, people people need to have someone who is just accepting, and I think that's important.
That is. So I know that the abortion was illegal in Michigan until 1973. So did that impact your career in any way?
um it did, because when I worked at in Saginaw, one of the doctors would order an abdominal x-ray on a young woman, and there would be a fetus there. And then he could say, oh no, she's been exposed to x-ray, so we need to do an abortion. And that was his way of getting around it.
Mhm. Wow. So, did you know anyone who worked with someone who gave this woman abortion other than this doctor that you talked about?
No, well, that's not true. My husband did work with patients of his, not with the doctor itself. Um, that was something that was very upsetting to me, only because he was, it was, I felt that people should have control over their bodies, but the way he was doing it was very unlawful, and using x-ray as a way to get around the law, and that wasn't right.
Mhm. So you feel like that instead of doing that, we needed a law that would allow people to do that safely.
Absolutely.
Mhm. So throughout your career, what was the hardest part of your job?
Oh, that's a good question. I never thought of that. I think the hardest part of my job was seeing people who were very, very, very sick. Um, I remember when I first was a second year student at Hurley, we had a young man who was like maybe 3 years older than I was and had um, cancer of the jaw,
Mhm.
and it had metastasized to his lung. And I think that was my first experience with a patient that I had x-rayed many times and had died. And that was very difficult.
And
See,
did working with these patients over and over, like on a daily basis, did that impact you mentally?
I think it did, but not in a bad way. I think it made me realize that if you were compassionate and did a good job for people, that made their life a little easier, and it made you realize how blessed you were and your family, um, by not having these horrible health problems.
Mhm. And what do you think was the most rewarding part of your job?
I think this is going to sound very crazy, but I actually think being a mentor to other x-ray techs and being a calming influence when things were going crazy. Um, and also, I didn't work a lot with children until the last part of my career. And making a child calm when they've broken a bone is really important. And that always made me feel good.
Mhm. So you mentioned that you were a mentor. On what subject did you guide your mentees?
Um, Mostly when I was when I worked in the outpatient department at Central DuPage Hospital, I was the manager of the outpatient clinic, and all the other techs and the rest of the staff, things could get pretty crazy and chaotic, and the management wasn't always honest and I guess you would use the word ethical, but making sure that things ran smoothly and just never getting caught up in the politics of it all. They ended up closing our clinic, and we had the highest patient satisfaction rating. And after they closed our clinic, the man who made that decision was fired. But my mentees were mostly the other employees there. They were x-ray techs and office people, phlebotomists, mammography techs. I think there were 10 altogether. And just keeping things calm and making sure the most important thing was to give good patient care.
How did you do that? Like, did you have to break any rules doing that?
No, I think the most important thing was to show them by the way I reacted and to make sure that I mirrored the things that I thought were important.
Mhm. You said that your clinic had the highest satisfaction rate. So why did he decided to close that clinic?
Because he felt that we didn't, we had a high satisfactory rating, but we didn't bring in a lot of revenue.
Mm,
And the cost of the running the clinic wasn't giving him enough, I guess the word would be enough revenue, that he felt that it was a business decision that he needed to keep the clinics open that were making the most money.
mhm. And do you think the fact that he got fired had to do anything with this decision?
I I know it did. Yes, I heard from someone that had worked there, and yes, that was one of the main decisions in his firing.
Mhm. Now, moving forward to your family and your children, could you please let us know when did you have your kids?
I was 22 when our son was born, and 25 when my daughter was born. We had two children.
And did you have to miss work because of pregnancy?
I did. I had 9 months of morning sickness.
Mm,
So I didn't work. I stopped working when I was 3 months pregnant with our son, and I didn't go back to work until our daughter was 2.5.
mhm. And do you think having children and taking that kind of a leave affected your career in any way?
Oh, that's a good question. I think at the time it didn't, and I think I was very lucky. Um, but also after that, I never went back to a hospital. I always worked in an outpatient setting, so I didn't have to work holidays or weekends.
So you said that you didn't get back to work until your daughter was 2.5 years old. So were you given maternity leave?
No,
So how did you take that days off?
I I just didn't get paid. My husband's salary was what we lived on, and maternity leave really wasn't, there wasn't such a thing at that time.
Mhm. So I assume your husband didn't get paternity leave?
Oh, no,
Mhm.
no. The only good thing was he worked at the same hospital that I had our children at. So they gave him time off to go to the labor and delivery room.
Mhm. So,
Although men weren't allowed in the labor room or delivery room at that time.
mhm.
The hospital that I had our children at had tried to open the delivery room up to the fathers, but they had one of the first times they did that, one of the fathers fainted and hit the railing at the hospital and ended up with a skull fracture.
Oh,
So they didn't allow fathers into the delivery room at that time.
mhm. Did you like to have your husband at delivery room with you?
I would have loved to have had my husband in there, but it wasn't possible.
And how did that affect you?
Um, I don't think, I think at the time it didn't bother me as much as it did afterwards. And I thought about how much he missed.
Yeah. So I know that women's right to credits was not guaranteed under the law until 1974. And I know that the legislation are not like a light switch and they don't change immediately. So I'm wondering, did you have any issues getting a bank account, a car, or a house since that the Equal Credit Opportunity Act did not end all discrimination for women immediately?
Well, when I got my first car, I was working and I couldn't put the loan in my name. It was in my father's name.
Mm,
And when I got married and I was 22, I finally was able to get the car in my name and my husband's name. Um, when I went to get my first car after I had graduated from X-ray school, my three brothers and my father went with me, and each one thought I should have a different car. And so it was quite the decision. But the loan and the title were all in my father's name.
mhm. Did you have the same issue when you wanted to get a home with your husband?
Um, the house was in his name, and the mortgage and everything was in his name. Um, and I'm thinking, I don't think I was working at the time, but everything was in his name, not in mine.
Mm. And what year was that?
That was 1970.
Mm.
No, it was 1971.
71. Okay. And how did that make you feel?
You know, because of the time and the thinking, I don't think it bothered me at the time. I don't think I thought much about it. I know that when the car was in my dad's name, that kind of bugged me. Um, but I think because when you're married, as far as I was concerned, everything was ours. It didn't matter what the paper said.
Hmm. But did you have any kind of conversation with your husband about it, that the mortgage was not in your name?
Um, yeah, I just remember saying, well, if it's only in your name, I guess I don't have to worry about it. I don't have to pay it. That was the only thing.
And what did he think about it?
You know, I think if it had happened now, I would have been outraged.
Hmm.
But back then, I just thought, well, that's okay. He has to pay for it, so it's his problem.
So, wrapping up this interview, I only have a few final questions for you. So, at the beginning of the interview, I started by describing you as an amazing grandma, a farmer's daughter, and a retired X-ray tech. I'm wondering, how would you describe yourself?
I would describe myself as a woman of faith who loves her grandchildren and her children, and that I'm a good wife, a good partner, and a loving grandmother and mother.
So, if you could go back in time, what advice would you give to your younger self?
I would tell my younger self to be much more assertive and not to be so shy and just to love myself a little more.
That's a good advice. So, what goals do you have looking forward?
I I want to see my grandchildren achieve their goals.
So, looking back on all your experiences and achievements, what makes you the most proud of your younger self?
Of my younger self. Um, that I was able to find a career that I loved. And I think one of the things that I'm most proud of is I was proud when both of my children graduated from college, but I'm most proud of the parents they are.
Mhm.
That's very important to me.
Mhm. And as we close this interview, I want to thank you for taking the time to share your story with us today and our audience. It was truly a privilege hearing your story, and I am excited for the impact that this interview will have on our project, Witness to Her Story. Thank you so much, Virginia.
Thank you, Shahin. I really appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you. I really appreciate you too.